The coffee maker gurgled its final breath at exactly 6:47 a.m., the same time it did every morning in the reception area of Ramirez Holdings. I pressed the worn button twice more out of habit, knowing it wouldn't change anything, then filled my mug with the lukewarm result. 6 months of this routine had taught me that the machine's best work happened between 6:30 and 6:45, a window I'd missed while reviewing the morning's security briefings. My fingertips were still cold from the walk through the underground parking garage, the kind of bone-deep chill that New York's November mornings specialized in. I wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug, letting the meager warmth seep through as I scanned the day's schedule on my computer screen. Javier had meetings stacked from 9 until 6, with exactly 23 minutes allocated for lunch, which he'd inevitably skip to take a call from the shipping operations in Baltimore. The marble floors of the 42nd floor reception area gleamed under the recessed lighting, polished to a mirror shine by the night cleaning crew. Everything in Javier Ramirez's world existed in this state of controlled perfection. The leather furniture arranged at precise angles, the abstract art on the walls positioned according to some aesthetic formula I'd never quite understood. Even the temperature stayed locked at exactly 68 degrees, never varying by more than half a degree in either direction. I'd learned to exist within this controlled environment by becoming equally precise. My desk faced the elevator bank and Javier's private office simultaneously, a strategic position that let me intercept problems before they reached him. The phone on my left connected to his direct line. The tablet on my right displayed real-time updates from his various business operations. The concealed panic button under the desk's edge sat within easy reach of my left knee, though I'd never needed to use it. Not yet, anyway. The elevator chimed at 7:02. Pablo Flores emerged, Javier's head of personal security, carrying 2 large paper bags that smelled of fresh bagels and real butter. He nodded at me with the same careful politeness he showed everyone who worked for Javier, his dark eyes scanning the empty reception area out of habit before approaching my desk. "Morning, Miss Torres. Boss asked me to grab breakfast for the team. You want your usual? The everything bagel with plain cream cheese?" I smiled, genuinely touched that he'd remembered. "That's incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." Pablo set one of the bags on my desk, his expression softening slightly. In 6 months, I'd learned that he had a wife named Carmen and twin daughters starting kindergarten, that he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining Javier's organization, and that he took his coffee with exactly 3 sugars and no cream. Small details, but they mattered in a world where everyone else seemed interchangeable. "Boss is in early," Pablo said, lowering his voice slightly. "Got a call from the Baltimore operation around 5. Something about a shipment delay." I pulled up the shipping manifest on my tablet, scanning for irregularities. The container from Lisbon. "You're scary good at this, you know that?" Pablo's mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. "Yeah, that one. Portuguese customs held it for additional inspection. Routine or targeted? That's what Boss is trying to figure out." The phone on my desk rang, Javier's direct line lighting up. I lifted the receiver before the second ring. "Yes, Mr. Ramirez. Coffee, black, and whatever files we have on the Lisbon customs officials." His voice carried that particular edge that meant he'd been awake for hours, running scenarios and contingencies through his mind. "Also, cancel my 10 o'clock with the real estate developers. Reschedule for next week." "Already done, sir. I moved it to Tuesday at 2, which gives you time after your meeting with the accounting firm." I pulled up the relevant files on my tablet. "The Lisbon Customs documentation is in your secure email. Password is today's date, plus your mother's maiden name." Silence on the other end, the kind that made my pulse jump slightly. "Then, how did you know I'd need those files?" Pablo mentioned the Baltimore call. The Baltimore operation handles our European imports. The only current shipment from Europe is the Lisbon container. It seemed logical you'd want the customs paperwork. I kept my voice professionally neutral, the same tone I used for every interaction with Javier. "Your coffee will be ready in 3 minutes. Make it 2. He hung up without goodbye, which was standard. I rose from my desk, smoothing my charcoal skirt, and headed for the small kitchen area adjacent to the reception space. The coffee maker here was commercial grade, nothing like the temperamental machine at my desk, and I'd learned exactly how Javier preferred his coffee. Fresh beans ground each morning, water heated to 195 degrees, steep time of exactly 4 minutes, no sugar, no cream, served in the specific mug he'd brought from home, a simple ceramic piece that seemed out of place among all the corporate precision. While the coffee brewed, I reviewed the Lisbon files on my phone. Standard customs inspection. Nothing that raised immediate red flags, but the timing was suspicious. Portuguese officials rarely held shipments without cause, which suggested either legitimate concerns about the container's contents or someone had paid them to create delays. The coffee finished at exactly 7:09. I carried it to Javier's office, knocking twice before entering. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, still wearing yesterday's white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and the top 4 buttons undone. His dark hair, usually styled with precision, fell slightly forward over his forehead. He hadn't shaved, the shadow of stubble along his jaw making him look more dangerous than usual. Portuguese customs has been cooperative in the past, I said, setting his coffee on the desk mat designed to protect the wood. The inspector assigned to this case is new. Started 3 weeks ago. Javier's gray eyes lifted from his computer screen to focus on me. You memorize the customs personnel? I maintain files on anyone who regularly interacts with our international operations. It seemed prudent. I clasped my hands behind my back, a habit I'd developed to keep from fidgeting under his intense scrutiny. The new inspector's name is Antonio Silva. No obvious connections to any of our competitors, but his predecessor retired suddenly, which could indicate pressure or payoff. Find out everything about Antonio Silva. Family, debts, political affiliations, favorite restaurant. Javier lifted his coffee, taking a long drink before adding, and find out who facilitated the previous inspector's retirement. I'll have preliminary information by noon. Make it 11. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Miss Torres. Yes, sir? How long have you been awake? The question surprised me enough that I answered honestly. Since 4:30. Why? The Baltimore call came through the main security line first. Pablo forwarded it to your cell, but the automated system also sent me an alert. I met his gaze steadily. I reviewed the relevant files in case you needed them, which you did. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to identify. That's not part of your job description. Neither is anticipating which meetings you'll want to cancel, but I do it anyway. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, my carefully maintained professional veneer slipping for just a moment. My job is to make your life easier, Mr. Ramirez. However I can do that most effectively. His eyes narrowed slightly, a predatory focus that made the air between us feel suddenly charged. Careful, Miss Torres. That sounded almost insubordinate. Did it? I raised an eyebrow, letting the full force of the sarcasm I usually suppressed color my voice. How terribly unprofessional of me. I'll try to contain my devastating wit in future interactions. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Then, unexpectedly, Javier's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Your devastating wit is noted. Now go find out who's interfering with my Portuguese shipments before I have to make an example of them. I left before the conversation could veer into stranger territory, returning to my desk with my pulse beating faster than the situation warranted. 6 months of perfect professionalism, and I'd just let my guard slip because I was tired, and he'd caught me off balance. Stupid. The morning progressed with its usual controlled chaos. I fielded calls from 3 different business managers, rescheduled 2 meetings, and compiled a preliminary background report on Antonio Silva that revealed interesting connections to a shipping competitor based in Barcelona. By 10:47, I had enough information to suggest that someone was indeed interfering with Javier's operations, and by 11:03, I'd identified the most likely culprit. I knocked on Javier's office door, entering when he called permission. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Spanish to someone who was clearly receiving bad news. I set the report on his desk and turned to leave, but he gestured for me to stay, finishing his call with a curt goodbye that sounded more like a threat. "Tell me," he said, pocketing his phone. "Diego Sanchez runs shipping operations out of Barcelona and Lisbon. He's been trying to expand into the North American market for 2 years, but you control most of the reliable routes." I pulled up a photograph on my tablet, showing a man in his late 30s with slicked-back dark hair and an expensive suit. "He bribed Antonio Silva to delay your shipment, hoping the spoilage would damage your reputation with your Baltimore clients." "How certain are you?" 93%. Silva's daughter started at a private university in Madrid last month. Tuition is 60,000 euros annually. Silva makes 40,000 euros per year as a customs inspector. The math doesn't work unless he had outside financial help. Javier crossed to his desk, scanning my report with the focused attention he brought to everything. "Solutions? Short term, I've already contacted our shipping broker in Lisbon. They're arranging an expedited inspection with a different customs official. The container should clear by tomorrow morning." I pulled up a second screen on my tablet. "Long term, Diego Sanchez has been operating at a loss for 8 months, according to these financial records. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous, but also vulnerable. If we undercut his shipping rates by 15% for the next quarter, he'll lose his remaining North American clients and likely fold entirely. That would cost us considerably. Less than continuing to fight his interference in every port. And once he's eliminated as a competitor, we can restore our rates to previous levels." I met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, Mr. Ramirez. I thought you of all people would understand that principle." The corner of his mouth twitched again, that almost smile that never quite materialized. "Your sarcasm is showing again, Miss Torres." "Is it? How unprofessional." I turned toward the door, then paused. "I'll implement the rate reduction unless you object. The financial impact should be minimal compared to the strategic advantage." "Do it." He paused. "And Paloma?" The use of my first name stopped me completely. In 6 months, he'd never called me anything but Miss Torres. I looked back at him, suddenly hyper-aware of the way his dress shirt fell open at his throat, the way the morning light caught the gray in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being awake at 4:30, for thinking 3 steps ahead, for making my life easier." The sincerity in his voice felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might crack at any moment. "That's what you pay me for, sir." "No." He moved closer, not quite invading my space, but near enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. "I pay you to answer phones and manage my schedule. Everything else you do? That's you choosing to be exceptional." My breath caught in my throat, professional distance evaporating like morning fog. "Mr. Ramirez." The reception area phone rang, shrill and insistent. I seized the interruption like a lifeline, excusing myself and practically fleeing to my desk. My hands were trembling slightly as I answered the call. Some vendor with a question about an order that I handled on autopilot while my mind raced. What the hell was that? I forced myself to focus on work, diving into the tasks that had accumulated during the morning. By 1:30, I'd handled the shipping rate adjustments, confirmed tomorrow's meetings, and organized the quarterly financial reports Javier would need for his afternoon review. Normal work, normal routine. Nothing that would require me to think about the way he'd looked at me or the way my pulse had jumped when he said my name. At 2:17, the elevator chimed. I glanced up, expecting a client or one of the business managers, and instead saw a delivery person holding an enormous bouquet of red roses. At least 3 dozen, arranged in a crystal vase that caught the light and threw rainbow fractals across the marble floor. "Delivery for Paloma Torres?" The young man consulted his clipboard. That you? Yes, but there must be some mistake. I stood, moving around my desk to intercept him. I didn't order flowers. Someone else did. He grinned, setting the massive arrangement on my desk with a thud that made my coffee mug jump. Lucky you. These things cost a fortune. He left before I could protest further, and I stood staring at the roses like they might explode. 3 dozen perfect blooms, deep red petals just beginning to open, nestled in greenery and baby's breath. The crystal vase alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. There was a card tucked among the flowers. I pulled it out with fingers that had gone cold despite the office's constant 68 degrees. To someone who deserves beautiful things. From an admirer who's been watching. No signature, no name. Just those 2 sentences that made my stomach clench with a mixture of flattery and unease. What the hell is that? I spun around to find Javier standing in his office doorway, his expression thunderous as he stared at the roses. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight, every line of his body radiating barely controlled fury. Flowers, I said, stating the obvious because my brain had apparently short-circuited. Someone sent me flowers. Who? The single word came out like a whip crack. I don't know. The card doesn't say. I held it out, but he didn't move to take it, just kept staring at the roses like they'd personally offended him. It's probably just a mistake. Wrong person, wrong address. 36 red roses in a Waterford crystal vase. His voice had gone dangerously soft. That's not a mistake. That's a statement. He crossed the space between us in 3 long strides, moving with the lethal grace that reminded everyone why people feared him. He snatched the card from my hand, reading it with an expression that made me take an involuntary step backward. An admirer who's been watching, he read aloud, and something in his tone made the words sound obscene. Someone's been watching you. It's probably just a figure of speech. It's a threat. He crumpled the card in his fist. Someone's sending you a message. Someone's making a claim. That's insane. Who would... Diego Sanchez. The name came out like a curse. We just cost him his North American operations. This is retaliation. My mind raced, connecting dots I didn't want to see. You think he sent me flowers as revenge? I think he sent you flowers to make a point, to show he knows exactly where you work and who you are. Javier's gray eyes had gone cold and flat, the look he got before he made someone disappear from a room and they never came back. To use you as leverage against me. That's ridiculous. I'm just your secretary. Why would anyone? You're not just anything. He grabbed the vase, lifting it off my desk with hands that shook slightly with suppressed rage. And you're not keeping these. Excuse me? Anger flared, cutting through my confusion and fear. Those are mine. Someone sent them to me. Someone sent them to threaten you, to use you, to get to me. He turned toward the elevator, carrying the roses like they were contaminated. You're not keeping them. I moved without thinking, stepping into his path and planting my hand on his chest. The first time I'd ever touched him, the first time I'd ever physically challenged him. Put them down. He went absolutely still, looking down at my hand on his chest like it was a live grenade. Paloma. Put. Them. Down. I shoved against him, not moving him an inch but making my point clear. I don't care if you think they're a threat or a message or a declaration of war. They were sent to me, not you, and you don't get to decide what I keep or throw away. The hell I don't. His free hand came up to grip my wrist, not hurting, but definitely restraining. Someone is targeting you because you work for me. That makes it my problem. Then deal with your problem without destroying my property. I jerked my wrist free, years of suppressed frustration boiling over. I have worked for you for 6 months. 6 months of perfect professionalism. 6 months of anticipating your every need and making your impossible life run smoothly. 6 months of saying yes, sir, and of course, sir, and whatever you want, sir, while you bark orders and expect miracles. The one time, something is about me instead of you. You can't just let it be. The roses crashed to the floor. Crystal shattered across the marble in a spray of water and petals and greenery. The sound echoed through the empty reception area like a gunshot, and for one frozen moment, neither of us moved. Then Javier had me backed against the wall beside the elevators, both hands braced on either side of my head, his body so close I could feel the heat radiating from him. His eyes were pure storm clouds, dangerous and churning. You think I'm angry about the flowers? His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, more intimate and terrifying than shouting. You think this is about some threat from Diego Sanchez? Isn't it? No. He leaned closer, until I could count the flecks of darker gray in his irises. I'm angry because someone else thought of it first. Someone else sent you flowers and called you beautiful and told you that you deserve nice things. Someone else is watching you and thinking about you and making claims. My breath caught. Javier. 6 months, he said, echoing my words. 6 months of perfect professionalism. 6 months of pretending I don't notice how smart you are or how your sarcasm makes me want to laugh. 6 months of telling myself you're off limits because you work for me and I don't mix business with anything else. His right hand moved from the wall to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. And then some bastard sends you roses, and I realize I've been lying to myself. Because I don't want you to keep them. I don't want you smiling at someone else's flowers. I don't want anyone else watching you or admiring you or thinking they have any claim to your attention. That's insane, I whispered, even as I leaned into his touch. Probably. His smile was sharp and dark. But you're the one who's been awake since 4:30 for me. You're the one who learns customs inspectors' names and anticipates which meetings I'll cancel. You're the one with the devastating wit that you hide behind professional distance. He lowered his head until his forehead almost touched mine. Tell me you don't feel this too. Tell me I'm imagining the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I should have denied it. Should have pushed him away and resigned and walked out of this building and never looked back. Instead, I fisted my hands in his shirt and pulled him the last inch closer. You're not imagining anything, I said. I've been fighting this since the first week I started working for you. Since you looked up from your computer and actually saw me instead of just another employee. Since you started drinking your coffee the way I make it even though you never told me your preferences. Since you started anticipating my questions before I ask them. Paloma. But you're right that this is insane. You're my boss. This violates every professional boundary ever written. If anyone finds out, they won't. His voice was absolutely certain. No one needs to know. This stays between us. That's not, we can't just... Words failed as his thumb brushed my lower lip. Can't we? His eyes searched mine, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Tell me you don't want this. Tell me you want me to step back and pretend this conversation never happened. Tell me you want someone else's flowers on your desk. I couldn't. God help me, I couldn't. Instead, I rose on my toes and kissed him. The world narrowed to the press of his mouth on mine. The taste of coffee and something darker. The way his hands slid into my hair as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that made my knees weak. This wasn't gentle or careful. This was 6 months of suppressed want erupting into something fierce and consuming. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his expression had shifted into something predatory and possessive. Mine, he said, the single word vibrating with conviction. You're mine now, Paloma. Those roses? They're going in the garbage. Anyone else who tries to send you flowers? They're going to learn very quickly that you're not available. That's incredibly presumptuous, I managed, even though my hands were still fisted in his shirt. Is it? He kissed me again, briefer but no less intense. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you're not mine. I couldn't. The truth was written in every accelerated heartbeat, every sharp intake of breath, every way I'd reorganized my life around making his easier. You're not wrong, I admitted. But this is still insane. Probably. He released me slowly, stepping back, but keeping his eyes locked on mine. But we're doing it anyway. The elevator chimed. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers as Pablo emerged, taking in the shattered crystal and scattered roses with one comprehensive glance. His expression remained carefully neutral, but I saw the moment he connected the dots. Everything okay here? Pablo asked, looking between us. Fine, Javier said, his voice perfectly controlled again. Miss Torres received unwanted flowers. I disposed of them. Uh-huh. Pablo's tone suggested he believed exactly none of that. You want me to find out who sent them? Already did. Diego Sanchez. Javier pulled out his phone. Get me everything on his current location. I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, who he's fucking. Everything. On it. Pablo headed for the security office, then paused. Boss? Maybe give Miss Torres a chance to clean up before your 3 o'clock arrives? Only then did I realize I was still pressed against the wall, my hair disheveled, my lips undoubtedly swollen from kissing. Heat flooded my face as I pushed away, smoothing my skirt and trying to reassemble some semblance of professionalism. I need to... The words tangled on my tongue. Clean this up, then go home early. Javier's tone had returned to business, but his eyes stayed hot on mine. We'll talk tomorrow. About Diego Sanchez? Among other things. He moved closer again, lowering his voice so only I could hear. I meant what I said, Paloma. You're mine now. That means I protect what's mine. Anyone who threatens you, they're done. Then he was gone, disappearing into his office and closing the door with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than slamming. I stood among the ruins of 36 red roses, my pulse still racing, my lips still tingling, my entire world tilted on its axis. What the hell had I just done? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Javier's hands in my hair, tasted coffee and danger on his lips, heard him say, "You're mine," with that absolute conviction that left no room for argument. By 4 a.m. I'd given up on rest entirely and sat at my small kitchen table with cold tea, watching the city lights through my apartment window and trying to convince myself that yesterday had actually happened. The roses. The kiss. The way everything I'd carefully constructed over 6 months had shattered as thoroughly as that crystal vase. My phone buzzed at 4:17. A text from an unknown number. Pablo gave me your personal cell. Don't come in early today. I'll have a car pick you up at 8:30. We need to talk. Jay. I stared at the message, my stomach doing complicated gymnastics. The professional thing would be to text back a polite acknowledgement. Instead, I typed, "You can't just command me to take a car service." His response came immediately. "Watch me." Despite everything, I smiled. Then, "Fine. But I'm buying my own coffee on the way. The car will have coffee. Your usual." I pay attention too, Paloma. The use of my first name in text felt different than hearing it spoken. More intimate somehow, like he was crossing yet another boundary, claiming more territory. I should have been annoyed. Instead, warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. At 8:30 precisely, a black sedan pulled up outside my building. The driver was one of Javier's security team, a quiet man named Esteban, who nodded respectfully and held the door. Inside, true to Javier's word, sat a to-go cup from the artisan coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. The one I stopped at every Saturday morning, ordering their house blend with exactly 1 sugar and a splash of cream. He really did pay attention. The drive to the office took 20 minutes through morning traffic. I used the time to check emails on my phone, responding to routine requests and flagging items that would need Javier's direct input. Normal work. Normal routine. Except nothing felt normal anymore. When the elevator opened on the 42nd floor, Javier was waiting at my desk. He'd changed clothes since yesterday. Dark charcoal suit today, crisp white shirt with a burgundy tie that brought out the warmer tones in his gray eyes. But the stubble remained, and the intensity in his gaze when he looked at me made my breath catch. "My office," he said. "Now." I followed him through the door he held open, hyper-aware of Pablo watching from his station near the security office. The door clicked shut behind us, and suddenly we were alone in a space that smelled of leather and expensive cologne and the faint hint of the coffee he'd already been drinking. "Sit," Javier gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. "I'd rather stand." Perversity made me say it. Some need to establish that yesterday hadn't completely demolished my ability to push back. His mouth curved into that almost smile. "Stubborn. Practical. If this is the conversation where you tell me yesterday was a mistake and we should forget it happened, I'd prefer to be able to walk out quickly." "Is that what you think this is?" He moved around his desk to stand directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "You think I spent the night running worst-case scenarios and decided to retreat? Didn't you? I spent the night thinking about how your mouth tastes and how your hands felt fisted in my shirt, and how I'm going to manage not touching you every time you walk into a room." His voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper. "I spent the night accepting that I've lost my goddamn mind over my secretary and I don't care who knows it." My pulse hammered. "Javier." "But first, we need to talk about Diego Sanchez." The subject change was so abrupt I blinked. He pulled out his phone, showing me a photograph of the man I'd identified yesterday. Pablo spent the night tracking his movements. He's in New York. Cold dread replaced the warmth in my chest. "Since when?" "He flew in yesterday morning, 4 hours before those roses were delivered." Javier swiped to another photo, this one showing Diego entering a building I recognized, the one housing my favorite coffee shop. "He's been watching you, Paloma, following your routine, learning your patterns." The coffee in my stomach turned sour. "How long?" "At least a week, based on security footage Pablo pulled from various locations." Another swipe, another photo. Diego standing across from my building. Diego in the lobby of Ramirez Holdings, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Diego outside the small Italian restaurant where I sometimes grab dinner. He's not subtle about it. He wants you to know you're being watched. Why? But I already knew the answer. Because you matter to me. Javier's jaw tightened. Because he's done his research and figured out that you're not just my secretary. You're the one who keeps this entire operation running smoothly. You're the one who anticipated the Lisbon problem and solved it before I even asked. You're valuable, which makes you a target. I sank into the chair after all, legs suddenly unsteady. This is because I cost him his North American contracts. This is because he's a desperate man making stupid choices. Javier crouched in front of me, bringing his eyes level with mine. Listen to me carefully. Diego Sanchez is dangerous when cornered. He's lost most of his legitimate income, which means he's likely moving into less legitimate ventures to stay afloat. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. Anything that pays fast and doesn't care about ethics. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to make you understand the reality of this world. His hands covered mine where they gripped the chair arms. You've spent 6 months seeing the business side of what I do, The meetings, the contracts, the shipping manifests. But there's another side. The side where men like Diego exist. Where threats are real and violence is a tool, and people disappear when they become inconvenient. I'm not naive, Javier. I know what you are. Do you? He studied my face with unnerving intensity. You know I run an empire built on controlling shipping routes and import channels. You know I have security teams and offshore accounts and business competitors who fear me. But do you know what I did to the last person who threatened someone I cared about? I swallowed hard. No, good, because you never will, and neither will anyone else. He released my hands, standing and moving to the windows overlooking the city. Diego Sanchez made a mistake yesterday. He showed his hand too early, got impatient, wanted to rattle me. Now I know he's here. I know what he wants, and I know exactly how to eliminate him as a problem. How? That's not your concern. He glanced back at me, expression unreadable. Your concern is accepting that, as of yesterday, the rules changed. You're not just my secretary anymore. You're under my protection, which means you don't go anywhere without security. You don't take the subway. You don't walk to your coffee shop. You don't deviate from approved locations and routes. Anger flared, cutting through the fear. You can't just imprison me because some rival sent flowers. I can, and I will if it keeps you safe. That's not protection, Javier. That's control. I stood, moving to face him directly. I understand there's a threat. I understand Diego is dangerous. But I'm not some helpless damsel who needs to be locked in a tower. I'm the woman who figured out he was bribing customs officials and cost him his entire North American operation. Give me some credit. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you use me. The idea had been forming since he'd showed me the photos, crystallizing into something that felt both reckless and right. Diego's watching me, following my patterns. Let him. But instead of trying to hide me away, use me as bait to draw him out where you can deal with him on your terms. Absolutely not. Why not? I'm already a target. At least this way. No. The single word cracked like a whip. I'm not dangling you in front of a man who traffics in human misery and hoping he takes the bait. That's not a plan, Paloma. That's suicide. Then what's your plan? Keep me under guard indefinitely while Diego keeps escalating? Wait for him to get desperate enough to try something bigger? I crossed my arms. You taught me to think strategically. Well, strategically the smart move is to control the battlefield instead of letting him choose when and where to strike. Javier stared at me for a long moment, jaw working like he was grinding his teeth. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. You're insane. I learned from the best. Flattery won't change my mind. I'm not trying to flatter you. I'm trying to get you to see reason. I moved closer, lowering my voice. Yesterday you said I was yours, that you protect what's yours. Well, I'm telling you how to protect me most effectively, by letting me help instead of sidelining me like I'm fragile. His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs stroking my cheekbones with a gentleness that contradicted the storm in his eyes. You are many things, Paloma Torres. Brilliant, sarcastic, stubborn as hell. But fragile? No. That's never been the problem. Then what is? The problem is that I just found you. His forehead touched mine, his breath warm against my lips. 6 months of fighting this, of pretending I didn't care, of telling myself you were off limits. And the moment I stop pretending, the moment I admit what I want, someone threatens to take you away. I can't. His voice roughened. I won't risk you. Not for strategy, not for revenge, not for anything. The raw emotion in his words cracked something open in my chest. This was the man behind the empire, the person beneath the power. vulnerable in ways he never showed anyone else. "You won't risk me," I said softly. "But you'll risk yourself every day. You'll walk into meetings with people who'd kill you if they could. You'll make enemies and eliminate threats and build your empire on a foundation of calculated danger. Why am I different? Because you're you. Simple. Absolute. Terrifying." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. Pablo found Diego. He's at the Belmont Hotel, 5th floor, room 5 on 12. That's 6 blocks from here. I know. He released me, already moving toward his desk and the secure drawer where I knew he kept things that weren't strictly legal. "I'm ending this today." "Javier, wait." "No waiting. No strategy. No using you as bait." He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "Pablo's assembling a team. We're going to have a conversation with Diego about the consequences of threatening what's mine." A conversation. I didn't bother hiding my skepticism. A very pointed conversation. His smile was sharp and cold. "Stay here. Don't leave this floor. I'll have Esteban stationed outside the elevator." He paused at the door. "And Paloma? If anything happens, if Diego somehow gets past security, if anyone you don't recognize approaches you, if you feel even slightly threatened, you press that panic button under your desk. Immediately. Understood?" I nodded, throat tight. He crossed back to me in 2 long strides, kissing me hard and fast. "I'll be back in 2 hours. Then we're going to finish the conversation we started yesterday." Then he was gone, taking half the air in the room with him. I returned to my desk on shaking legs, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes. Javier was going after Diego. Personally. Because of flowers and photos and threats against me. The morning crept by with agonizing slowness. I handled emails, confirmed meetings for next week, reviewed quarterly projections that normally would have absorbed my full attention. But my mind kept circling back to the Belmont Hotel, to whatever pointed conversation Javier was having, to the very real possibility that he might not come back. At 11:47, my desk phone rang. Pablo's extension. "Miss Torres." His voice was tight. "Need you to stay calm, but we've got a situation." My hand found the edge of my desk, gripping until my knuckles whitened. "What kind of situation?" "Diego wasn't at the hotel. He checked out an hour before we arrived." A pause. "But he left something for the boss. A message." "What message?" "A photo. Of you. Walking into your building last night." Another pause, heavier this time. He wrote on the back, "Such a pretty building. Shame if something happened to it." Ice flooded my veins. He's threatening my home. "Boss is already en route back to the office. He wants you in his penthouse tonight. No arguments. No discussion. You're staying where he can protect you." "Pablo, this isn't negotiable, Miss Torres." Diego escalated. "Boss is responding. Just trust him, okay? He knows what he's doing." The line went dead. I sat at my desk, staring at nothing, as the full weight of my new reality settled over me like a shroud. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern was whether the coffee maker would work properly. Now I was moving into my boss's penthouse because a shipping magnate had decided to use me as leverage in a war I barely understood. The elevator chimed at 12:03. Javier emerged, flanked by Pablo and 2 other security personnel I recognized from the lobby detail. His expression was thunderous, every line of his body radiating barely leashed violence. He went straight to his office without looking at me, but Pablo stopped at my desk. "Pack your personal items. Anything you can't leave behind. We're moving you out of here in 30 minutes. "Moving me where?" "Boss's penthouse. Top floor of this building." Pablo's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "It's the most secure location we control. Reinforced walls, dedicated security team, panic room if things go sideways. Diego can't get to you there. This is insane. Yeah, well, welcome to the family business. He gestured toward my desk drawers. 30 minutes, Miss Torres. Boss is making calls, pulling in favors, activating every resource he has. By tonight, Diego Sanchez won't be able to breathe without us knowing about it. But right now, you need to be somewhere safe while we work. I packed mechanically, pulling files I'd need for next week's meetings, the framed photo of my grandmother that sat beside my computer, the emergency makeup kit I kept in the bottom drawer, normal items from a normal life that no longer existed. Javier emerged from his office at 12:34. Jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up like he'd been physically fighting something. His eyes found mine immediately. Ready? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He took my bag without asking, his other hand settling on the small of my back as he guided me toward a private elevator I'd never used. Pablo and the security team formed a perimeter around us, creating a moving bubble of protection that felt both absurd and necessary. The private elevator required a key card and biometric scan. It rose smoothly, passing the floors I knew, reception, business operations, executive suites, and continuing upward to a level I hadn't known existed. The doors opened directly into a foyer that screamed wealth and taste. Hardwood floors in a rich dark finish, original art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city that made my breath catch. This is your home, I said, because my brain apparently needed to state the obvious when overwhelmed. This is our home now. Javier set my bag down, then pulled me close, his hands framing my face with that same devastating gentleness. I know this is happening fast. I know you didn't sign up for wars with shipping magnates and moving into your boss's penthouse after one kiss, but Diego made his choice when he threatened you. This is me making mine. What choice is that? Keeping you safe, no matter what it costs. His thumb traced my lower lip. You said I risk myself every day. You're right. But that's my choice, my danger, my calculated gambles. You didn't choose this world. You chose a job, and I've dragged you into something you never asked for. Stop. I gripped his wrists, holding his hands against my face. Yesterday I told you I've been fighting this since the first week. Fighting wanting you. Fighting caring about you. Fighting the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. You didn't drag me anywhere, Javier. I walked into this with my eyes open. You couldn't have known. I knew exactly who you were the day I accepted this job. I knew the rumors, the whispers, the carefully worded warnings from friends who told me working for Javier Ramirez meant entering dangerous territory. I held his gaze steadily. I chose it anyway. I chose you. So don't you dare act like I'm some innocent victim who stumbled into the wrong life. I'm exactly where I want to be. Something in his expression cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the control. Even now? Even with threats and security details and having to hide in my penthouse? Especially now. I pulled his hands down but didn't release them. Because now I get to see who you really are when someone threatens what matters to you. And Javier, I like what I see. He kissed me then, deeper and slower than yesterday's desperate collision. This was claiming and promise and surrender all wrapped into something that made my knees weak. When we broke apart, his smile was real and warm and completely devastating. You're going to be the death of me, Paloma Torres. Probably, I agreed, but at least you'll die happy. His laugh was surprised and genuine, the sound filling the beautiful space around us. For just a moment, the danger and threats and complications faded, leaving only us. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression sobering. Pablo found Diego's base of operations, warehouse in Brooklyn, registered under a shell company, but definitely his. We're moving tonight. Moving how? You don't need those details. Stop protecting me from information. I pulled back, putting space between us. If I'm staying here, if I'm accepting your protection, then I need to understand what's happening. All of it. No more shielding me like I'm fragile. Javier studied me for a long moment, something like pride warming his eyes. We're going to raid the warehouse, confiscate whatever inventory Diego's been running through there. Send a message that threatening you was the worst mistake of his life. And Diego himself? If he's there, we'll have a very final conversation about boundaries. The cold certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, I felt oddly calm. This was the world I'd chosen, the man I'd accepted. Violence wasn't theoretical anymore. It was the price of staying safe in a life built on power and control. How long until you leave? 2 hours. Pablo's coordinating with our contacts in the NYPD to make sure we don't get interrupted. The warehouse district is mostly abandoned at night, so collateral damage should be minimal. I'll be here when you get back. I know you will. He pulled me close again, resting his chin on top of my head. You're mine, Paloma. That means you're safe here. No one gets through my security. No one touches what's mine. Possessive, I murmured against his chest. Absolutely. No apology in his voice. You're the one good thing I've claimed in a decade of building this empire. I'm not letting anyone take you away. We stood like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other, finding comfort in proximity as the clock ticked toward whatever violence the night would bring. Finally, Javier pulled back, kissing my forehead with unexpected tenderness. Make yourself at home. The kitchen is fully stocked. The bedroom on the right is yours, and there's a library on the second floor if you need distraction. Security team is monitoring every access point, and I'll have my phone on me the entire time. Be careful. Always. But we both knew that was a lie. He left, taking the private elevator back down to whatever preparations awaited. I stood in the foyer of his penthouse, our home now, he'd said, and tried to process the surreal turn my life had taken in just 36 hours. Then I pulled out my laptop and started researching everything I could find about Diego Sanchez and his known associates. If Javier wouldn't tell me details, I'd find them myself, because he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't just some possession to be protected and hidden away. I was the woman who'd cost Diego his North American contracts. The woman who'd solved the Lisbon customs problem in under 3 hours. The woman who knew how to anticipate problems and eliminate them before they became threats. And if Diego Sanchez wanted to use me as leverage, he was about to learn that I was far more dangerous than any pretty secretary had a right to be. The penthouse was silent, except for the muted hum of the city 43 floors below. I'd given up pretending to work an hour ago, my laptop abandoned on the marble kitchen counter as I paced between floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into a carpet of lights. 11:47 p.m. Javier had been gone for 4 hours. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark and unhelpfully quiet. I'd resisted texting him 17 times, knowing he didn't need distractions while dealing with Diego. But every minute that ticked past made my imagination conjure worse scenarios. What if the warehouse was a trap? What if Diego had anticipated the raid and laid an ambush? What if Javier was bleeding out in some Brooklyn alley while I stood in his penthouse drinking expensive wine and pretending I wasn't terrified? The private elevator chimed at 11:53. I spun toward the sound, pulse hammering. The door slid open to reveal Javier, flanked by Pablo and 2 other security personnel. He was limping slightly, his white dress shirt torn at the shoulder and spattered with something dark that made my stomach clench. But he was walking, conscious, alive. Relief hit me so hard, I had to grip the back of the couch to stay upright. Everyone out, Javier said, his voice rougher than usual. Debrief tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Pablo hesitated. Boss, you should let medical out now. The security team filed back into the elevator without further argument, though Pablo shot me a look that clearly said, make sure he doesn't bleed to death before morning. Then they were gone, and it was just us. Javier stood in the foyer, swaying slightly, his gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You're still awake." "Of course I'm still awake." "It's almost midnight, and you went to commit violence against the man who threatened me." I moved toward him, cataloging injuries with the clinical focus I'd learned during a brief stint volunteering at a free clinic in college. "You're hurt. Superficial." But he didn't resist when I guided him toward the kitchen, where the light was better. "Sit." I pointed at one of the bar stools. For once, he obeyed without argument, lowering himself carefully and wincing when his back made contact with the chair. I grabbed the first aid kit I'd discovered earlier while exploring the penthouse. Of course, he had a medical-grade kit in his kitchen, because nothing about Javier Ramirez was ever unprepared. "Shirt off," I said, pulling out supplies. His mouth curved into that almost smile, despite the pain clearly etched in the lines around his eyes. "Bossy. You're not the boss here right now. I am." I started unbuttoning his ruined shirt, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. "So, unless you want to explain to Pablo why you bled all over your expensive furniture, you'll cooperate." He raised his arms, letting me pull the shirt over his head. The movement revealed a tapestry of old scars I'd never seen before. A knife wound along his ribs. A bullet grazed near his left shoulder. Burns on his right side that looked years old. And fresh over it all, new damage. Scrapes across his knuckles, a deep gash along his collarbone, bruises already blooming purple-black across his abdomen. What happened? I dampened gauze with antiseptic, starting with the collarbone wound. Diego wasn't at the warehouse, but 6 of his men were, guarding 3 shipping containers full of weapons. Military-grade assault rifles, some still in factory crates. He hissed when the antiseptic hit raw flesh but didn't pull away. They weren't inclined to surrender quietly. Hence the injuries. Hence the education in why threatening my people is bad for their health. His hand came up to catch my wrist as I worked. "Thank you. For cleaning your wounds? For waiting up. For not falling apart when I walked in bleeding. For looking at me right now like I'm not a monster who just broke several bones belonging to men who were only following orders from a desperate employer." I paused, meeting his eyes. "Did you kill them?" "No. But they'll think twice before working for anyone who targets my operations again." His thumb traced circles on my wrist. "Diego's running out of options. The weapons were his last asset, and we confiscated all of it. He's desperate now, which makes him more dangerous." "Did you find anything that tells us where he is?" "Shipping manifests, burner phones, a laptop that our tech specialist is cracking as we speak." He watched me apply butterfly bandages to his collarbone with focused intensity. "But more importantly, we found floor plans." Something in his tone made me pause. "Floor plans of what?" "Your building." The antiseptic-soaked gauze slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the marble counter. "What?" "Detailed schematics, every floor, every apartment, every access point marked." His voice had gone flat and cold. "Including your unit, with your schedule written in the margins, when you leave for work, when you return, which entrance you use." Nausea rolled through me. He was planning to break in, take you, use you to force my cooperation with whatever new scheme he's concocted. Javier's hands framed my face, anchoring me. "That's not going to happen. You're not going back there, Paloma. Ever. Your apartment is compromised. Your routine is mapped. Your entire life has been studied by someone who sees you as a tool to control me. So what? I just live here forever? Hide in your penthouse while you fight my battles?" "Yes." No hesitation, no apology. Until Diego is eliminated as a threat. Until I've dismantled every piece of his organization and made an example that discourages anyone else from similar ideas. However long that takes. I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself. That's not a life, Javier. That's a cage with nicer furniture. It's safety. It's protection. It's the price of being important to someone in my world. He stood, moving toward me despite the obvious pain. I won't apologize for that. I won't pretend I'm giving you a choice. You're staying here, under my watch, until this is finished. And what if I refuse? The question came out sharper than intended. What if I pack my bag and walk out that door and go back to my compromised apartment and my mapped routine? Then I'll follow you. Put security on every floor of your building, in every entrance, watching every window. Turn your entire neighborhood into a surveillance operation that would make intelligence agencies jealous. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You can refuse all you want, Paloma. But you're not going back into danger just to prove you're not a possession. I don't own you. I never said I did. But I will protect you, with or without your permission. That's insane, controlling, completely disproportionate to a few flowers and some photos. His laugh was sharp. Probably. But I told you yesterday who I am when someone threatens what matters to me. This is that. This is me making sure you survive my world long enough to decide if you actually want to be part of it. The raw honesty in his voice cracked my anger. I already decided. I told you that this morning. You decided before you knew your apartment had been mapped. Before you knew Diego was planning abduction. Before you understood what it really means to be mine in this world. He pulled me close despite the fresh wounds I'd just bandaged. I need you to decide again. Now, with full information about what you're accepting. I pressed my forehead against his bare chest, feeling his heartbeat against my cheek. Strong, steady, alive. Tell me about the first time someone threatened something you cared about. He went very still. Paloma, you want me to decide with full information? Then give me all of it. Tell me what happened to the last person who made the mistake Diego's making now. For a long moment, I thought he'd refuse. Then his arms came around me, holding me close as he spoke words I suspected he'd never said aloud. Her name was Carmen, Pablo's younger sister. His voice was carefully controlled, emotion locked down beneath practiced precision. 12 years ago, before I'd built most of this empire, I was still fighting for territory against older, more established organizations. One of them, a trafficking operation run by a man named Torres, decided to target the people close to me to force cooperation. I lifted my head to look at him. What happened? They took Carmen, held her for 72 hours while Torres made demands. Access to my shipping routes, a percentage of my profits, essentially turning me into a subsidiary of his operation. The muscle in his jaw ticked. I agreed to everything. Set up a meeting to finalize terms, brought the contracts, the access codes, everything he asked for. But you didn't actually give him what he wanted. I gave him exactly what he deserved. Javier's eyes had gone cold and distant, looking at something 12 years in the past. The meeting location was a warehouse I owned. The contracts were forgeries. And the 20 men I'd hidden throughout the building were all carrying very specific instructions about what happens to people who touch my family. Where's Torres now? Gone. Completely and utterly erased from existence, along with his entire organization. He refocused on me, vulnerability creeping back into his expression. Carmen was safe, shaken but unharmed, and every trafficking operation in the city learned a very clear lesson about boundaries. You're afraid Diego will try the same thing. Use me like Torres used Carmen. I'm certain he'll try. The floor plans, the schedule, the surveillance. It's all preparation for abduction. He probably has a location already chosen, demands already planned. His hands tightened on my waist. But unlike 12 years ago, I'm not waiting for him to make his move. I'm ending this before he gets the chance. How? By finding him first. By making him understand that threatening you was signing his own death warrant. No mercy in his voice, no hesitation. Diego Sanchez will disappear, Paloma, completely, just like Torres did. The declaration should have horrified me. Instead, I felt oddly calm. When? Soon. Pablo's tracking every lead from the warehouse. Our contacts in the shipping industry are watching for any movement of Diego's remaining assets. The tech specialist is cracking that laptop, which should give us communication records and location data. He traced my cheekbone with careful fingers. But until then, you stay here. Safe. Protected. Mine. Possessive, I murmured, echoing my earlier accusation. Absolutely. He lowered his head, kissing me with a gentleness that contradicted everything he'd just described. You're the one thing in this world I can't afford to lose. So yes, I'm possessive. Yes, I'm controlling. And yes, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, including things that would make you look at me differently if you knew the details. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm a lot harder to scare than you think, Javier Ramirez. I'm discovering that. His smile was real but tired. You cleaned my wounds without flinching. You asked about my past without judgment. You're standing in my arms after I admitted to making people disappear, and you're not running. Where would I run to? My apartment with the compromised security? Back to a normal life that stopped existing the moment I kissed you? I reached up to push that rebellious strand of hair off his forehead. I meant what I said this morning. I chose this. I chose you. The empire, the danger, the violence you keep trying to protect me from. I see all of it, and I'm still here. Why? The question came out almost broken. Why would someone like you, brilliant, sarcastic, so goddamn good at everything you touch, why would you choose someone like me? Because you make coffee exactly how I like it without being told. Because you noticed when I changed my morning routine after the second week. Because you've never once treated me like I'm less intelligent than you, just differently specialized. I cradled his face in my hands. Because underneath all this power and control and violence, you're the man who spent 4 hours raiding a warehouse to protect me, then came home bleeding and still worried about whether I waited up. He kissed me again, deeper this time, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. Stay, he whispered. Not because I'm ordering you. Not because it's the safe choice. Stay because you want to. Because this, us, matters more than the complications. I'm already staying. Where else would I be? His laugh was soft and relieved. Reasonable people would be running. Good thing I've never been accused of being reasonable. I stepped back, assessing his injuries with fresh eyes. Now sit back down and let me finish bandaging you before you bleed all over your expensive floors. He obeyed, settling back onto the bar stool with a wince. I resumed my work, cleaning the smaller cuts and scrapes, applying antibiotic ointment, wrapping the deeper wounds with professional efficiency. You're good at this, Javier observed, watching my hands work. Volunteered at a free clinic in college. Pre-med track before I realized I preferred analyzing systems to cutting into them. I secured the bandage on his ribs. Turn around. Let me check your back. He rotated carefully, revealing more bruises and a nasty scrape along his shoulder blade. I cleaned it gently, hyper-aware of the trust he was showing by letting me see him this vulnerable. The free clinic, he said. That's where you learn to read people so well, to anticipate needs before they're spoken. Partly, mostly it was growing up with my grandmother. I applied ointment to the scrape. She had early onset dementia. By the time I was 16, I'd learned to predict her needs based on tiny behavioral cues. Which mood meant she needed music, which silence meant she was slipping into confusion, how to guide her back to the present without making her feel lost. I'm sorry you had to grow up that fast. Don't be. She taught me everything important before the disease took her. How to bake bread from scratch, how to balance accounts down to the penny, how to read Shakespeare and appreciate jazz and understand that intelligence comes in many forms. I finished with his back, moving around to face him. She also taught me that sometimes the most dangerous-looking people are just protecting something they can't afford to lose. Understanding flickered in his eyes. She'd have liked you being here, with me. She'd have terrified you with questions about your intentions and your financial stability, and whether you'd ever read anything by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I smiled at the memory. But yes, eventually, she would have approved. She always said I needed someone who could keep up with my mind, not just tolerate it. I don't just keep up. I'm fascinated by it. He pulled me close, careful of his injuries. The way you solve problems I haven't articulated yet. The way you organize chaos into beautiful efficiency. The way your mind works 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Flatterer. Honest. He kissed my temple. I've worked with brilliant people my entire career. Accountants who can spot financial discrepancies through layers of shell companies. Lawyers who find loopholes in contracts everyone else thinks are airtight. Security specialists who think like criminals. But you're different. You see patterns in human behavior. You anticipate needs and solve problems before they become crises. That's not something you can teach. That's instinct honed by experience. Warmth bloomed in my chest. Are you trying to seduce me with compliments about my professional competence? Is it working? Disturbingly well. I pressed a kiss to his uninjured collarbone. Though you should probably rest before attempting anything too athletic. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Probably wise. Pablo will have my head if I tear open these bandages doing something stupid. Then let's get you to bed. The one you're sleeping in. Alone. While you heal. I helped him stand, supporting his weight as we moved through the penthouse toward the master bedroom I'd carefully avoided exploring earlier. The room was masculine and understated. Dark wood furniture, crisp white linens, more floor-to-ceiling windows offering that same stunning view. Personal in ways the rest of the penthouse wasn't. Photos on the nightstand showed a younger Javier with people I assumed were family. Books stacked beside the bed suggested he read before sleep. Everything carefully controlled, just like the man himself. I pulled back the covers, helping him settle against the pillows. He moved carefully, mindful of his injuries, but his eyes never left my face. "Stay," he said again. "Just sleep. Nothing else. I need to know you're here." The vulnerability in his voice cracked the last of my resistance. I kicked off my shoes and climbed onto the bed beside him, careful not to jostle his injuries. His arm came around me immediately, pulling me close until my head rested on his uninjured shoulder. "This is insane," I murmured against his chest. "Probably." His fingers traced patterns on my shoulder. "But you're here anyway." "I'm here anyway," I agreed. We lay in comfortable silence, listening to each other breathe, finding peace in proximity, despite everything threatening us outside these walls. Eventually, Javier's breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, exhaustion finally claiming him. But I stayed awake, watching the city lights through the windows, thinking about floor plans and weapons caches, and the man currently using me as leverage to control the empire builder sleeping beside me. Diego Sanchez had made his choice. He'd targeted me, studied me, planned to use me as a tool in his desperate attempt to salvage his failing operation. Tomorrow, I'd start making choices of my own. Because Javier was wrong about one thing. I wasn't just something to be protected while he fought my battles. I was the weapon Diego didn't see coming. I woke to empty sheets and the smell of coffee. Pale morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the master bedroom in shades of gold and pearl. The space beside me where Javier had slept was still warm, suggesting he hadn't been gone long. I checked my phone. 6:43 a.m. The sound of voices drifted from somewhere else in the penthouse. Javier's controlled baritone alternating with Pablo's rougher tones. I climbed out of bed, smoothing my wrinkled clothes from yesterday, and followed the conversation to a room I hadn't explored yet. The office was smaller than Javier's workspace at Ramirez Holdings, but no less impressive. Dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most cars, and spread across every surface, photos, documents, maps, all connected by red string in a pattern that suggested Pablo had been working through the night. Both men looked up as I entered. Javier's eyes warmed immediately, his gaze tracking over me like he was confirming I was real and present. Pablo nodded respectfully, his expression carefully neutral despite finding me emerging from his boss's bedroom in yesterday's clothes. "Morning," I said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere closer to awkward. I heard voices. Pablo cracked Diego's laptop. Javier gestured to the organized chaos. "We've been mapping his operation." I moved closer, studying the materials with the analytical focus I brought to all complex systems. Photos showed warehouse exteriors, shipping manifests, financial records. The maps detailed locations throughout Brooklyn and Queens, each marked with annotations in Pablo's precise handwriting, and connecting everything, patterns I recognized from months of tracking Javier's business operations. "He's restructuring," I said, tracing one thread of red string from a warehouse to a shipping company to a customs official. "Moving away from legitimate trade into black market goods. These manifests show electronics, but the weight doesn't match standard shipments. He's disguising something heavier." Pablo exchanged a look with Javier. "She's right. Tech specialist says the manifests have been doctored. Real contents are weapons and ammunition." "Where's he storing them?" I leaned over the desk, scanning the maps. 4 locations we've identified so far. Javier pointed to marks in Brooklyn, but he's smart enough to keep moving inventory. We raid one warehouse, he shifts to another. We shut down a supplier, he finds a new source. So you need to hit all 4 simultaneously, cut off his options before he can adapt. That's the plan for tonight. Javier's jaw tightened. But Pablo found something else. "Show her." Pablo pulled out a document, sliding it across the desk. A contract, dense with legal language, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Asset acquisition, personnel transfer, compensation for services rendered. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "This reads like..." "A bill of sale," Javier finished, his voice flat and cold. "Diego's been in contact with a trafficking network, the same one Torres ran before I eliminated him 12 years ago. They've reformed under new leadership, and Diego's offering them something in exchange for muscle to protect his weapons operation." My stomach turned. "Offering them what?" "You." The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. "He's planning to trade you to cover his debts to the network. Give them his asset, his exact wording, in exchange for armed protection while he rebuilds his shipping empire." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to breathe through the nausea. "When?" 3 days from now, Friday night. There's a scheduled meeting at one of the warehouses, the one in Red Hook. Diego brings you. The network provides 20 armed men and forgiveness of his outstanding debts. And if he doesn't have me, then they come after him, and us, and anyone else they think might have interfered with their business. Pablo's expression was grim. "These aren't amateurs playing at crime, Miss Torres. This is an organized operation with international reach and zero tolerance for disruption." I processed the information, my mind already running scenarios. So we have 3 days to eliminate Diego before the meeting. 2 days, Javier corrected. We need a buffer in case something goes wrong. Pablo's coordinating the simultaneous raids for tomorrow night. Every warehouse, every storage facility, every asset Diego has left. We're dismantling all of it in one operation. And Diego himself? That's where it gets complicated. Javier moved around the desk, standing close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes despite his controlled demeanor. We don't know where he's hiding. The laptop had location data, but nothing current. He's been moving between safe houses, never staying anywhere longer than a few hours. So, find what he cares about and use it as bait. I met his gaze steadily. Same strategy you suggested I couldn't participate in yesterday. Absolutely not. Why not? If I'm the asset he's planning to trade, I'm also the leverage you can use to draw him out. Let him think he's won. Let him come for me on your territory, where you control the battlefield. No. The word was absolute. I won't dangle you in front of human traffickers and hope we can protect you when they make their move. Then what's your alternative? Raid his warehouses and hope he surfaces? Wait for him to find another way to strike at me? Frustration sharpened my voice. You said I was yours, that you'd protect me. Well, let me help you protect me effectively instead of keeping me locked in this penthouse while you fight battles I could help win. Pablo cleared his throat diplomatically. Actually, boss, her idea has merit. Javier's head snapped toward his security chief. Excuse me? Think about it strategically. Diego expects us to hide her, expects us to be defensive while he maintains the initiative. But if we flip the script, let him think he's getting what he wants, we control when and where the confrontation happens. Pablo gestured to the maps. Set up a scenario where Diego believes he can grab her with minimal risk. Lead him into a location we've prepared. End this on our terms instead of reacting to his moves. You're both insane. We're both strategic. I moved closer to Javier, lowering my voice. I understand you want to protect me. I understand the thought of me in danger makes you want to lock me away until every threat is eliminated. But Javier, that's not sustainable. Diego is one problem. There will be others. Will you keep me hidden forever? Or will you trust me to be the partner I've proven I can be? His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs stroking my cheekbones in that gesture I was starting to recognize as his way of grounding himself. If something happened to you, then you'd burn down everyone responsible. I know. You've made that abundantly clear. I covered his hands with mine. But nothing will happen because you're the most controlling, strategic, paranoid man I've ever met, and you won't let me walk into danger without enough backup to invade a small country. Right? Despite everything, his mouth curved into that almost smile. You're manipulating me. I'm appealing to your rational mind over your protective instincts. There's a difference. Pablo coughed, sounding suspiciously like he was suppressing a laugh. She's got you there, boss. Javier shot him a look that would have made lesser men flee. Then he sighed, pulling me close despite Pablo's presence. Fine, but with conditions. So many conditions you'll think I've lost my mind. I already think you've lost your mind. That's why we work. I softened the sarcasm with a kiss to his jaw. What conditions? First, Pablo coordinates every detail. You don't move without his approval. You don't deviate from the plan without his explicit permission. His word is law. Agreed. Second, minimum 20-man security detail. Armed. Positioned throughout the location with clear sightlines and overlapping fields of fire. Reasonable. Third, you wear a tracking device. Multiple tracking devices. GPS, RFID, audio transmitter. We know where you are every second. Paranoid, but acceptable. Fourth, at the first sign Diego's brought reinforcements we didn't anticipate or altered the plan in any way, you abort. Immediately. No heroics, no attempts to salvage the operation. You get out and let us handle it. I hesitated. Define first sign. Pablo's definition. Whatever he determines is a threat that exceeds acceptable parameters. Javier's expression was unyielding. This is non-negotiable, Paloma. I'm already compromising my every instinct by letting you participate. You don't get to argue about the safety measures. Fine. Agreed to all conditions. I turned to Pablo. When and where? He consulted his notes. We need 24 hours to set up properly. Friday morning, we leak information through one of Diego's known associates, someone who'll run straight to him with news that you're being transferred to a new location. Vulnerable during transport. Limited security because we're trying to move you quietly. Where's the actual location? Warehouse in Long Island City. We own it through a shell company Diego doesn't know about. It's clean, isolated, and we can control every access point. Pablo pulled up a building schematic. Loading dock entrance here, 2 side doors, 1 roof access. We position teams at each entry point, put snipers on the roof of the adjacent building, and wait for Diego to take the bait. And when he shows up, we determine if he's alone, or if he brought the trafficking network early. If he's alone, we take him quietly. If he brought backup, we engage and eliminate the entire group. Pablo's tone was matter-of-fact, describing violence like a logistics problem. Either way, the threat ends Friday night. Javier hadn't released me, his arms wrapped around my waist like he was physically holding me in place. There's a 5th condition I didn't mention. Of course there is. You stay here, in the penthouse, under guard, until Friday morning. No going to the office, no leaving this floor, no exceptions. I need to know you're completely safe while we prepare. That's 3 days locked in a gilded cage. That's 3 days where Diego can't make an unexpected move, where I can focus on planning without worrying that you're exposed. His voice dropped lower, where I can breathe knowing you're protected. The raw admission cracked my protest. I softened against him, feeling the tension in his frame. Okay, 3 days, but I want updates. Every detail of the planning. No hiding information to protect me. Deal. He pressed a kiss to my temple. Now Pablo and I need to finalize the warehouse raids for tonight. Why don't you make yourself at home? Kitchen's fully stocked, libraries on the 2nd floor, and there's a gym on the 3rd level if you need to work off stress. This penthouse has 3 floors? 4, technically. The top floor is just the rooftop garden. He released me reluctantly. We'll be in here most of the day coordinating with the teams. If you need anything, I'll manage. I headed for the door, then paused. Javier? Yes? Thank you for trusting me, for listening instead of just issuing orders. His smile was small but genuine. Thank you for giving me conditions instead of ultimatums. Makes it easier to say yes when you're being reasonable. Don't get used to it. My reasonable period has a limited duration. Pablo's laugh followed me out of the office. I spent the day exploring the penthouse that would be my home for the next 72 hours. The kitchen was professional grade, stocked with ingredients I recognized from the artisan markets I'd once browsed on weekends. The library held first editions and classics mixed with contemporary thrillers, organized with the same precision Javier brought to everything. The gym on the 3rd floor had equipment I didn't recognize, and a view that made working out feel like flying. By evening, I'd cook dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and vegetables, but enough to feed the small army of people working in Javier's office. Pablo accepted his plate with surprised gratitude, and Javier's expression when I brought him food was worth every moment spent chopping garlic. You didn't have to do this, he said, but he was already eating. I was hungry. You were busy. It seemed logical to cook enough for everyone. I perched on the edge of his desk, ignoring Pablo's amused look. Besides, if I'm going to live here, I might as well make myself useful. You're plenty useful just existing. But he pulled me closer, stealing a kiss that tasted like marinara sauce and gratitude. The warehouse raids happened at 11 p.m. I watched from the penthouse, tracking updates via the laptop Javier had given me access to. 4 simultaneous operations coordinated by Pablo, each team moving with military precision. By midnight, all 4 warehouses were secured, inventory catalogued, and Diego's remaining assets confiscated. But Diego himself remained missing. Javier returned at 2 a.m., exhausted but uninjured. I'd waited up, pacing the living room, unable to rest until I knew he was safe. He pulled me into his arms the moment he entered, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "It's done," he murmured against my hair. His weapons, his inventory, his safety nets, all gone. He's cornered now, desperate. Which makes Friday more dangerous. Which makes Friday the end. He lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "I meant what I said about conditions, Paloma. At the first sign of trouble, you abort. I can't lose you." "You won't." I kissed him softly, because I have too much to live for, including a very controlling boss who makes excellent coffee and terrible decisions about acceptable risk. His laugh was tired, but real. "Come to bed. We have 3 days to prepare, and I need sleep before I can think clearly." We walked to the master bedroom together, this time without hesitation or awkwardness. I changed into one of his shirts, soft cotton that smelled like him, while he stripped down to just sleep pants. The sight of his healing injuries made my chest ache, but the bruises were already fading. He pulled me close as soon as we were settled, arranging me against his side with careful precision. "Tell me something," he said into the darkness. "Why aren't you more afraid? Of Diego? Of Friday? Of this entire insane situation?" "All of it." I considered the question seriously. Because I've spent my whole life being afraid of the wrong things. Afraid of not being smart enough, successful enough, important enough. Afraid of taking up too much space or asking for too much. And then I met you. And I realized that real fear is watching someone I care about walk into danger while I hide behind safety protocols. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? You're terrified of me being in danger. I'm terrified of you being in danger. We're both scared of losing something that matters. I traced patterns on his chest. But I'd rather face that fear beside you than hide from it alone. His arms tightened around me. "You're going to give me a heart attack before this is over." "Probably. But at least you'll die happy." "Stop saying that." But he was smiling against my hair. We fell asleep wrapped around each other, finding peace in the eye of the storm. 3 days until Friday. 3 days until I walked into a warehouse and helped end the threat that had turned my life upside down. 3 days with the man who'd somehow become everything I never knew I needed. I planned to make each one count. Friday morning arrived wrapped in fog. I stood at the penthouse windows, watching the city disappear into gray mist, and tried to calm the adrenaline singing through my veins. Behind me, the penthouse hummed with controlled activity, Pablo coordinating with security teams, Javier reviewing every detail of the plan for the 17th time, tech specialists testing communication equipment. Coffee. Javier appeared at my side, pressing a warm mug into my hands. "Your usual." I accepted it, grateful for the familiar comfort. "Shouldn't you be preparing?" "I am prepared. Pablo's prepared. Everyone's prepared." He turned me to face him, his hand settling on my waist. "The question is, are you prepared?" "I've been wearing a tracking device for 3 days. I've memorized every detail of the warehouse layout. I know exactly where each security team is positioned." I met his eyes steadily. "And I know the abort protocol. Pablo says run, I run. No questions, no hesitation." "And if Diego brought the trafficking network early?" "Same answer. I trust Pablo to assess the threat and make the call." Javier studied my face for a long moment, searching for cracks in my composure. "You're remarkably calm for someone about to walk into potential danger," I'm terrified, I admitted. My hands are shaking, my stomach's in knots, and I've run through every worst-case scenario my brain can generate. But I'm also ready, because staying hidden while you fight my battles was killing me slowly. At least this way, I'm doing something. He pulled me close, resting his chin on top of my head. I hate this plan. I've hated it since you suggested it. The only reason I'm allowing it is because Pablo convinced me the alternative, waiting for Diego to strike unpredictably, was more dangerous. Pablo's smart. Pablo's pragmatic. There's a difference. He pressed a kiss to my hair. If anything happens, nothing will happen. You've planned for every contingency. You have 27 people positioned throughout and around that warehouse. You have snipers, ground teams, emergency extraction protocols. The only way this goes wrong is if Diego brings an army, and even then, Pablo will abort before things escalate. You have a lot of faith in my security chief. I have faith in the man who spent 12 years keeping you alive against people who wanted you dead. If he says the plan works, I believe him. Javier pulled back enough to cup my face in his hands. When this is over, when Diego's no longer a threat, what do you want? Really want? The question surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, you accepted this situation because I gave you no choice. You're living in my penthouse, participating in my plans, trusting my security. But you never asked for this life, never chose to be part of my world. His thumbs traced my cheekbones. So I'm asking, when the immediate threat is eliminated, do you want to stay? Or do you want your normal life back? I stared at him, processing the vulnerability beneath the question. You think I'm here just because of Diego? That I'm only playing along until I can escape? I think you're brilliant and adaptable, and capable of surviving anything. I think you could walk away from this tomorrow and rebuild your life without me. His voice roughened, and I think I need to know if that's what you're planning, before I get more attached than I already am. More attached? I laughed, despite the tension. Javier, you've had me under constant guard for 3 days. You've planned an elaborate operation to eliminate a threat to my safety. You barely sleep because you're too busy making sure I'm protected. How much more attached could you possibly get? You'd be surprised. He lowered his forehead to mine. Answer the question, Paloma. When this is over, are you staying? I thought about my small apartment with its questionable heating and creaky floors, about my routine of subway rides and coffee shops and weekend farmers markets, about the normal, safe, predictable life I'd built before Javier Ramirez had walked into it and set everything on fire. I'm staying, I said firmly, not because I'm trapped, or because I have no other option. I'm staying because somewhere between cleaning your wounds and planning operations and learning that you notice everything about me, I fell completely in love with you. And I don't want a normal life if it means giving you up. His breath caught. Say that again. I love you. I'm in love with you. And yes, your world is dangerous and complicated and occasionally terrifying, but it's also the world where I matter. Not just as efficient staff, but as someone you trust and protect and apparently lose sleep over. I gripped his shirt, holding him close. So, no, I'm not planning to leave when Diego's gone. I'm planning to help you build something that doesn't require constant warfare to maintain. Partners, remember? That's what you called us. The kiss he gave me was desperate and deep, pouring months of suppressed emotion into the contact. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I love you too, he said, the words sounding rusty, like he wasn't used to saying them. Since that first week when you reorganized my calendar and somehow made my impossible schedule work. Since you started anticipating my needs before I voiced them. Since I realized you weren't just making my life easier, you were making my life better. Javier, I'm terrified of today, of putting you in danger, of trusting that all my planning will be enough to keep you safe. He cupped my face again. But I'm more terrified of losing you because I tried to control everything instead of trusting you to be the partner you've proven you can be. Pablo appeared in the doorway, clearing his throat diplomatically. Boss, Miss Torres, we need to start the operation. Transport leaves in 10 minutes. The real world crashed back in. Javier stepped away reluctantly, his expression shifting from vulnerable to controlled in seconds. Final equipment check. Pablo? All teams in position. Snipers confirmed on adjacent building. Ground teams positioned at each access point. Tech has clear audio and video from every angle. Pablo handed me a small device. This goes in your pocket. GPS tracker, audio transmitter, emergency beacon. If you press the button 3 times fast, every team converges on your location immediately. I pocketed the device. Understood. Vehicle is a standard sedan. You'll be in the back seat. Driver is Esteban. You know him? He's solid. Route takes you through Long Island City. Approach the warehouse from the east side. Total transport time is approximately 18 minutes. And Diego's likely intercept point? 3 blocks from the warehouse. There's a construction zone that requires slower traffic. If he's going to make a move during transport, that's where. Pablo pulled up a map on his tablet. But we have teams stationed along the entire route. He won't get within 50 feet of the vehicle. Javier was pacing now, the controlled veneer cracking at the edges. Communication check. Everyone confirms audio. For the next 5 minutes, voices crackled through the communication system as each team checked in. 27 people, all confirming positions, all ready to protect one person from a desperate man. Transport is ready, Esteban's voice came through. Whenever Miss Torres is ready. I looked at Javier, memorizing every detail of his face. I'll see you in less than an hour, after this is finished. You'd better. He pulled me close one last time, kissing me hard. I love you. Be smart. Trust Pablo. And if anything feels wrong, I abort. I know. I pressed one more kiss to his lips, then stepped back before my courage could waver. Let's end this. The elevator ride down felt surreal. Pablo accompanied me, his presence solid and reassuring. In the garage, the sedan waited exactly as described. Standard black vehicle, nothing that would draw attention. Esteban stood beside it, his expression professionally neutral. Miss Torres. He opened the back door. I slid into the seat, and the door closed with a solid thunk. Through the tinted windows, I watched Javier standing in the garage, fists clenched at his sides, every line of his body radiating tension. Then Esteban pulled out, and we were moving. The drive through Manhattan was quiet. I watched the city slide past, tracking our progress against the mental map I'd memorized. Familiar streets gave way to industrial areas. Traffic thinned as we crossed into Long Island City. Approaching construction zone, Esteban said calmly. All teams report clear. I gripped the door handle, adrenaline spiking. This was it, the most likely intercept point. If Diego was going to make a move during transport, it would be in the next 60 seconds. The vehicle slowed, navigating around construction barriers. Workers in hard hats ignored us, focused on their own tasks. Orange cones channeled traffic into a single lane. Everything looked normal, routine, safe. We passed through without incident. Construction zone clear, Esteban reported. 2 minutes to warehouse. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The warehouse appeared ahead, a gray concrete structure that looked abandoned, exactly as Pablo had described. Esteban pulled up to the loading dock, putting the vehicle in park. Wait for my signal, he said, scanning the area. After a moment, clear, exiting vehicle now. He opened my door, and I stepped out into cool morning air. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the warehouse in sharp detail. Around us, I could feel rather than see the security teams positioned in hidden locations. Knowing they were there should have been comforting. Instead, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Inside, Esteban gestured toward the loading dock door. I walked toward it, forcing my steps to remain steady. The door was propped open, revealing darkness beyond. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to abort, to run back to the vehicle in safety. But I'd made my choice. I was seeing this through. I stepped inside. The warehouse was vast and empty, our footsteps echoing off concrete floors. Weak light filtered through grimy windows high in the walls. Somewhere in the shadows, I knew teams were positioned, watching, waiting. Position yourself in the center. Pablo's voice came through my earpiece. Give Diego a clear line of sight. We want him confident. I moved to the center of the space, turning slowly to take in my surroundings. Rusted machinery in the corners, empty pallets stacked against walls, a metal staircase leading to an office overlook. Everything exactly as the schematics had shown. And then I heard it. The sound of a vehicle approaching outside. Movement at the west entrance. A voice reported through comms. Single vehicle, 4 occupants. My pulse hammered. Is it Diego? Confirming identity now. A pause. Affirmative. Diego Sanchez in the front passenger seat. 3 unidentified males with him. 3? Pablo's voice sharpened. We expected him alone. Stand by for threat assessment. The warehouse's west door rolled open with a grinding sound. Diego stepped through, flanked by 3 men I didn't recognize. They were large, armed, moving with the practiced ease of professionals. Not random muscle, trained security. Diego looked exactly as his photos had shown. Slicked back dark hair, expensive suit, eyes that calculated odds and angles. When his gaze found me standing in the center of the warehouse, he smiled. Miss Torres, how kind of you to make this so easy. Assessment, Pablo's voice in my ear. 3 armed hostiles, professional bearing, threat level elevated but manageable. Hold position. I forced myself to stand still as Diego approached, his security fanning out to flank me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I trusted Pablo's judgment. Trusted the teams I couldn't see. You should have stayed hidden, Diego said, stopping 10 feet away. Ramirez's protective measures were quite thorough, almost impressive. But he made one mistake. He underestimated my desperation. And you made one mistake, I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. You threatened the wrong person. His smile widened. On the contrary, I threatened exactly the right person. The one thing Javier Ramirez couldn't afford to lose. His brilliant secretary who runs his empire and apparently warms his bed. Quite the valuable asset. Movement in my peripheral vision, shadows shifting, teams repositioning. Additional vehicles approaching from the north. A new voice reported through comms. Multiple heat signatures. At least 15 people. Pablo's voice cut through, sharp with command. Abort! Torres, abort now. This is a trap. But before I could move, Diego's men had their weapons out, trained on me with professional precision. I wouldn't, Diego said pleasantly. Tell your security teams to stand down, or I'll have my men eliminate you right here. And then we'll hunt down every single one of Ramirez's people until we find him. North entrance breached, another voice reported. Multiple armed hostiles entering. It's the trafficking network. They came early. The warehouse was suddenly filled with people. Diego's reinforcements pouring through the north entrance, armed and organized. 20, maybe 30 people. Far more than Pablo had prepared for. All teams engage, Pablo commanded. Protect Torres. I repeat, protect Torres. Gunfire erupted. I hit the ground as chaos exploded around me. Diego's men grabbed me, hauling me toward the west exit even as Javier's security teams engaged the trafficking network's forces. The sounds of combat filled the warehouse. Shots fired, bodies hitting concrete, shouted commands in multiple languages. Strong hands lifted me, carrying me toward a waiting vehicle. I fought back, remembering every move from the self-defense classes I'd taken. But these men were professionals. They subdued me with efficient brutality, binding my wrists with zip ties. "Get her in the van!" Diego shouted over the gunfire. "Move!" They threw me into the back of a vehicle, not the one Diego had arrived in, a different one positioned for quick escape. The doors slammed shut, engine roaring to life. Through the small window, I saw the warehouse receding, saw the battle still raging, saw Esteban go down, clutching his shoulder. And then we were moving, speeding away from the chaos, and I realized with cold certainty that despite all of Javier's planning, despite Pablo's precautions, despite 27 people positioned to protect me, Diego had won. The tracking device in my pocket felt useless now. They'd find me eventually, but eventually might be too late. I forced myself to breathe through the panic, to think strategically. Diego had planned this carefully, brought reinforcements, positioned vehicles for escape, timed everything to overwhelm Javier's security before they could respond effectively. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated how far Javier would go to get me back, and God help him when Javier found us. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that my terrifyingly capable, possessive, strategic boss would burn down the entire city before he let Diego keep me. I just had to survive long enough for him to find me. The van's motion changed, slowing from frantic escape to controlled navigation. Through the small window, I caught glimpses of industrial buildings giving way to residential areas, then back to industrial. They were being careful, avoiding predictable routes. My wrists ached where the zip ties cut into flesh. I'd stopped struggling 10 minutes ago, conserving energy, focusing instead on memorizing every turn, every landmark visible through the window. Javier would find me. I had absolute faith in that, but anything I could do to help him narrow the search would matter. Diego sat in the front passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Spanish to someone. From his tone, things weren't going as planned. The warehouse battle must have inflicted more damage on his trafficking network reinforcements than he'd anticipated. Good. "How much longer?" one of Diego's men asked from the driver's seat. 10 minutes. The safe house is in Queens, industrial area. Ramirez won't find it before we can negotiate terms. Diego glanced back at me, his expression calculating. And if he does, well, we'll remind him exactly what happens to people who interfere with business. I said nothing, just met his gaze steadily. Let him see that I wasn't broken, wasn't terrified into cooperation. Javier had taught me that power wasn't about volume. It was about presence, about refusing to flinch. My pocket vibrated once. The tracking device, confirming signal transmission. They were following us. The knowledge settled like warmth in my chest. The van pulled into a warehouse, different from the one we'd just fled, smaller, more decrepit. The kind of place that existed in administrative limbo, owned by shell companies and forgotten by city planners. Perfect for hiding human cargo. They dragged me out roughly, hustling me through a side door into a space that smelled of oil and mildew. No windows, one exit. A single overhead bulb casting harsh shadows. In the corner sat a chair, metal, bolted to the floor. They shoved me into it, zip-tying my ankles to the legs, my already bound wrists to the armrests. Professional restraint, designed to immobilize completely. Comfortable? Diego crouched in front of me, smiling that calculated smile. I apologize for the accommodations. Once Ramirez agrees to my terms, we'll get you somewhere nicer. He won't negotiate. Oh, I think he will. See, I've done my research on Javier Ramirez. Ruthless businessman, yes. Strategic thinker, absolutely. But he has one fatal flaw. He's sentimental about the few people he cares about. Diego pulled out his phone, showing me the screen. A text already composed. I have your secretary. Want her back alive? Wire $50 million to this account and dissolve your North American shipping operations. You have 2 hours. You think he'll just hand you $50 million? I think he'll do exactly what I tell him if he wants to see you again. Diego hit send. And once I have the money, once his operations are dismantled, I'll disappear. Start fresh somewhere his influence doesn't reach. Maybe South America, maybe Asia. Somewhere I can rebuild without Javier Ramirez destroying everything I touch. My pocket vibrated again. 3 short pulses. A pattern. I frowned, trying to remember what Pablo had said about the tracking device functions. 3 short pulses meant... The door exploded inward. Not opened. Not breached. Exploded, as charges detonated simultaneously on the hinges, blowing the metal off its frame. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and through the smoke and debris, Javier walked in like vengeance personified. He'd changed since this morning. Tactical gear instead of suit, Kevlar vest, dark clothes that made him blend with shadows, and in his hands, a weapon I'd never seen him carry. He wasn't alone. Pablo flanked him on the left, Esteban on the right despite the bandage visible on his shoulder. Behind them, at least 10 more security personnel, all armed, all moving with military precision. Diego's men reached for their weapons. They never got them raised. Javier's team moved like a coordinated unit, each person targeting a specific threat. Within seconds, Diego's 3 men were on the ground, disarmed, neutralized. Not dead. Javier had been precise about that, but completely incapacitated. Diego himself had frozen, hands raised, the color draining from his face as he realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. You have something of mine, Javier said, his voice dangerously soft as he approached. I want her back. Ramirez, wait. We can discuss terms. There are no terms. Javier gestured, and Pablo moved forward with a knife, cutting through my restraints with efficient precision. You took her. You threatened her. You made the mistake of thinking I'd negotiate for what already belongs to me. My hands were free. My ankles were free. Pablo helped me stand, steadying me when my legs wavered from sitting bound. And then Javier was there, pulling me against his chest, one hand cradling the back of my head while the other wrapped around my waist. Are you hurt? His voice shook slightly. Did they hurt you? I'm fine. Bruises from the restraints, but nothing serious. I clung to him, breathing in his scent, feeling the tension vibrating through his frame. You found me fast. GPS tracker led us straight here. We were 2 minutes behind the entire drive. He pulled back enough to inspect me visually, checking for injuries I might have downplayed. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated Diego would bring the network early. Should have planned for overwhelming force. Should have... Stop. I cupped his face in my hands. You found me. I knew you would. I trusted you would. And I'm fine. His forehead pressed against mine, and for just a moment, the dangerous man who'd just blown a door off its hinges was simply the person I loved, terrified and relieved in equal measure. Then he straightened, and the mask slid back into place. He turned to face Diego, who was backed against the wall, all his bravado evaporated. You wanted $50 million, Javier said conversationally, and the dissolution of my North American operations. Interesting proposal. We can forget that. Here's my counteroffer. Javier moved closer, each step deliberate. You leave New York. Tonight. You sell off your remaining assets. And yes, I know about the 3 shell companies you thought were hidden. You disappear completely from any shipping operation in the Western Hemisphere. And in exchange, I let you live. Diego's mouth worked soundlessly. Alternatively, Javier continued, I can demonstrate exactly what happens to people who touch what's mine. I can make you disappear the same way I made Torres disappear 12 years ago. I can ensure that every trafficking network, every criminal operation, every person who even thinks about crossing me understands the consequences through your very public example. I accept, Diego gasped. Your terms. I'll leave tonight. You'll never see me again. Damn right I won't. Because if I do, if I hear even a whisper that you're operating anywhere my influence reaches, I'll finish what I started here. Javier gestured to Pablo. Escort Mr. Sanchez to his vehicle. Make sure he understands that leaving the city means leaving permanently. Pablo grabbed Diego by the collar, hauling him toward the destroyed doorway. The last I saw of the man who'd upended my life was his terrified face as he was dragged into the night. Javier turned back to me, his expression softening. Let's go home. Home. Not my apartment. Not back to the warehouse. Home to the penthouse where I'd spent 3 days preparing for this moment. The ride back was quiet. I sat pressed against Javier's side in the back of the SUV, his arm around me, his hand stroking my hair with absent gentleness. Pablo drove, occasionally meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror with expressions that suggested he'd been just as worried as Javier. Back at the penthouse, the security team dispersed to handle cleanup and coordination. Javier led me straight to the master bathroom, running a hot bath while I sat on the edge of the tub and finally let myself shake. I thought I'd lost you, he said quietly, testing the water temperature. For approximately 17 minutes, I thought Diego had taken you somewhere I couldn't track, somewhere I'd never find you, and those were the longest 17 minutes of my life. I wasn't worried. He looked at me incredulously. You were bound in a warehouse with human traffickers and you weren't worried? I was worried about the tactical situation, about Diego's reinforcements and whether Pablo's teams were overwhelmed. But worried about you finding me? I shook my head. Never. I knew you'd come. The only question was how much destruction you'd cause getting there. His laugh was surprised and slightly unhinged. You have entirely too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount. I stood, wrapping my arms around him despite the tactical gear and weapons he still carried. Thank you for not negotiating, for coming straight through that door like an avenging angel. Avenging demon, more likely. But he held me close. I'm done with half measures, Paloma. Done with trying to protect you from the reality of my world while keeping you at arm's length. You're in this completely now, which means you need to understand exactly what that entails. I think I got a fairly comprehensive demonstration tonight. Tonight was reactive. What I'm talking about is active participation. He pulled back, meeting my eyes seriously. I want you beside me. Not as my secretary, though you're brilliant at that. Not as someone I'm protecting from the darkness. As my partner in every sense. Building an empire together. Making decisions together. Facing threats together. My breath caught. Javier, I'm going to clean up my operations. Transition everything to completely legitimate business. Cut ties with anyone who operates in gray areas. Build something you can be proud of instead of something you tolerate. His hands framed my face. And I'm going to marry you. Not soon. We should probably date longer than a week before making that official. But eventually, when you're ready. I'm going to marry you and build the life you deserve. Tears stung my eyes. That sounds like a proposal. It's a statement of intent. The actual proposal will be much better planned. He smiled, real and warm and completely devastating. But I need you to understand what you're accepting, not just the danger. Tonight proved you can handle that. But the weight, the responsibility, The reality that being my partner means sometimes making impossible choices. I understand. Do you? He searched my face. Because there's no going back from this, Paloma. Once you're truly part of this world, once everyone knows you're mine, you become a target. Permanently. Every enemy I make becomes someone who might see you as leverage. Every deal I negotiate becomes something that could affect you. Every decision I make ripples through your life. Good thing I'm excellent at analyzing ripple effects and planning for contingencies. I kissed him softly. I love you. I chose you. I'm choosing you again right now, with full understanding of what that means. So stop trying to talk me out of a future we both want. His smile was brilliant and relieved. Stubborn woman. You love it. God help me, I do. We stayed in the bathroom while the tub filled, wrapped around each other, processing everything that had happened. Eventually, Javier helped me into the water, then stripped off his tactical gear and joined me, mindful of the space and the fact that I was still shaky from adrenaline crash. What happened at the warehouse? I asked, settling against his chest. After they took me? Pablo's teams engaged the trafficking network. 15 of them were neutralized, killed or captured. The rest fled when they realized they were outgunned. Esteban took a bullet to the shoulder, but he's tough. He'll heal. Javier's arms tightened around me. The whole operation was compromised from the start. Diego must have had someone watching our movements, feeding him information. We're still tracking down the leak. And Diego himself? On a flight to Buenos Aires as we speak, under heavy surveillance to ensure he actually leaves. If he's smart, he'll stay gone. If he's stupid, he'll try to rebuild somewhere my influence reaches, and I'll finish what I started. We soaked until the water cooled. Then Javier dried me with care that felt like worship, checking for injuries I'd missed, making sure I was truly okay. By the time we collapsed into bed, it was nearly dawn. Sleep, he commanded, pulling me close. We'll deal with everything else tomorrow. I nodded against his chest, exhaustion finally claiming me. But before I drifted off, I murmured, You know, if you're transitioning to legitimate business, you'll need someone to help reorganize all your operations. Someone brilliant at seeing patterns and anticipating problems and making impossible schedules work. His chest rumbled with laughter. Are you angling for a promotion, Miss Torres? Partner, remember? We discussed this. I kissed his chest sleepily. Besides, you need me. Who else would make your coffee exactly right? Good point. He kissed the top of my head. Partners it is then. In business, in life, in everything. Everything, I agreed. Outside, the city began waking up. But in the penthouse, wrapped in each other's arms, we found the peace that had been missing since roses arrived on my desk, what felt like a lifetime ago. Diego was gone. The threat was eliminated. And we had the rest of our lives to build something better than either of us had imagined possible. Starting with the moment I opened my eyes to find Javier watching me with an expression that promised forever. Morning, I murmured. Morning, he traced my cheekbone gently. I love you. I love you too. I snuggled closer. Now let me sleep another hour before we start reorganizing your empire. His laugh was the last thing I heard, before drifting back into dreams of futures built on partnership instead of protection, on trust instead of control, on love that had been forged in fire and emerged stronger for it. 8 months later, I stood in Javier's office, our office now, remodeled to include a second desk positioned beside his. The wall between us held a photograph, Javier and me at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new community center, funded by Ramirez Holdings' first charitable initiative. My desk held the usual chaos of my work: shipping manifests for completely legitimate cargo, contracts for above-board business deals, schedules for meetings with clients who didn't require armed security. And in the center, a crystal vase. Inside sat a single red rose, fresh that morning, with a note in Javier's familiar handwriting. For my partner. These you can keep. Always. J. I smiled, touching the soft petals. Then I returned to the proposal I'd been drafting. A plan to expand our operations into European markets through partnerships instead of hostile takeovers. Because we were building something new. Something that didn't require violence to maintain. Something we could both be proud of. The intercom buzzed. Miss Torres? Mr. Ramirez is ready for the 2 p.m. with the Berlin contractors. I'll be right there. I stood, smoothing my dress, navy blue, professional, the same kind I'd worn the day everything changed. Except now, instead of hiding my sharp tongue and suppressing my intelligence, I walked into meetings as Javier's acknowledged partner. The woman who'd reorganized his empire and helped him build something legitimate. The woman he'd proposed to 3 weeks ago, with a ring and a bouquet of roses and a smile that promised forever. I opened his office door to find him waiting, looking criminally handsome in his charcoal suit, top buttons undone in that way that still made my pulse jump. Ready, partner? He asked, extending his hand. I took it, lacing our fingers together. Always. And together we walked into the future we'd chosen, built not on threats and protection, but on partnership and trust and love that had survived everything the world threw at us. Starting with roses, ending with forever.